essentially creating a brand new policy that eventually was named a gold level policy from the organization City Health, and later scored a 96 out of 100 on Smart Growth for America's Complete Streets Policy Framework. So at the time, that's the best scoring complete streets policy in the nation for that year.
Welcome back to Cities in Motion. I'm Jacob. This is the podcast for anyone who wants cities built for people. Each week, we dig into the systems, design, and culture that shape urban life and explore how smarter transportation, better planning, and thoughtful policy can make our communities more livable. My guest today is Joey Pawlik, Executive Director of ActivateSA, a grassroots technical planning initiative working to build a more connected, equitable, and safe transportation network across the Alamo City. Joe is a native San Antonian and a bike commuter, transit user, and walker. He brings a serious policy background to this work. He's previously worked at Alamo Area NPO and with State Representative Barbara Gerben Hawkins. And he holds a Master of Science in Urban and Regional Planning from UTSA and a Bachelor's from Texas A&M. Please welcome Joey Pawlik to Cities in Motion. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about ActivateSA?
Sure, Jacob. So thanks for having me in ActivateSA. I'm the Executive Director of ActivateSA. We're a nonprofit, active transportation, transit, and land use advocacy organization here in San Antonio. We've been around since 2019, various fashions and forms, starting as like a working group of interested doers trying to make some things happen in our family active transportation space, and grew into a nonprofit who's, helping steer, big active transportation trails projects, the safe streets policies such as complete streets and more. So yeah, thanks for having me here today.
Yeah. The first thing that really caught my attention was your background, because one morning I grabbed my bike and went on a bike ride out of my hotel room and went south to Mission Concepcion, and I biked right past those apartments. And I was like, wow, this is so awesome. Must be really great to live here with bike racks and a path right next door to your apartments.
Yeah. And these are not my apartments.
I don't mean your apartments.
Yeah.
Like if you were to live there, that would be great.
Oh, yeah. This is a favorite photo of mine that just took one day when I was strolling around Southtown in San Antonio, and I just seen the people walking and the bike racks there, the pedestrian centric street lighting plus the trees and the trail, and can't see the river in there, but yeah, it's definitely one of our proudest elements here in San Antonio, our trails. So yeah. Glad you really enjoyed that too.
Yeah, it was great. Super easy, super bikeable. There were some restaurants right next to the trail, and I just thought how great it would be to live right there. Can you tell us about what your day-to-day work looks like as Executive Director of ActivateSA?
Oof, man.
If there is I'm sure it looks different every single day, but give us a snapshot.
Yeah, so we're a team of one full-time staff member, fortunate sometimes to have paid interns helping here and there. Largely, any nonprofit, you have the fun administration work, but also, the really fun part of my job, what really got me pulled into this role is, working with partner community groups, local elected officials, just general community members who want to see some changes happen, whether it's, again, advancing infrastructure projects, maybe trails or safe streets projects, to working on policy ideas and other fun stuff in between. So programming, we have a cool event called the Fiesta Bike Parade. It's our 6th year doing this. We're getting ready for that on April 11th. So it's a fun community-centric event we host, but also an opportunity for us to fundraise, but also talk about, important issues. So this year, we want to talk about some traffic calming conversations that the city of San Antonio is having in terms of how they want to revisit that approach. And so just kind of a mix of a little bit of everything, trying to, get volunteers to help us on advancing our mission. Yeah, a little bit, there's a lot of nuts and bolts to what we're doing and to how we're trying to, move our city forward in that direction.
Remind me when you guys were established.
Yeah, so I would say I go back to always 2019. And that's when our founder, Jim Bailey, he's a senior principal at Alamo Architects. He got together a group of folks who essentially wanted to find those missing trail connections here in San Antonio, identifying certain spots that we think the city should be working on, and it just kind of grew from there. That was in like spring 2019, and we did a lot of work during COVID to get the city to do some share the streets or open streets concepts, and it's grown from there.
Over the past couple of years, what have been like your proudest projects that you've gotten to work on?
So over the past couple of years, I joined ActivateSA full time as a executive director in April 2023, and we got to work immediately um, and working on trying to get the city to adopt a new complete streets policy. So at the time, they were working on getting a new bike network plan up and going. And we're like, hey, we have also not touched our complete streets policy since 2011. We need to do something about that. It does not meet our national standards. We're working with folks like the American Heart Association, building a coalition, supporting that. And that was one of our there are some other policies and plans, like I mentioned, going on around that time. Four big policies and plans were adopted within a year. But Complete Streets was really exciting because we did a lot of really hands-on work in improving and updating that policy, essentially creating a brand new policy that eventually was named a gold level policy from the organization City Health and later scored a 96 out of 100 on Smart Growth for America's Complete Streets Policy Framework. So at the time, that's the best scoring Complete Streets policy in the nation for that year.
Okay,
So
very cool.
that
I didn't know
policy
that.
was
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, that policy was adopted in September 2024.
Okay. I mean, I'm native to Texas. I've lived in Texas all my life. I grew up in the Austin area, but I've been visiting San Antonio for years and years and years. And since graduating college, I've been going to this convention consistently every single year, and I got to see like changes happening. I last year Hemisphere Park was surrounded by fencing and construction, and this year I showed up and a lot of it was open, and it was so great to witness and walk around and get my daily coffee and just take a walk. And I just see all this work being done downtown. And do you get to work with any of this new construction that's happening around downtown, trying to incorporate walkability and trails into these new projects that I see happening?
Yeah, so that's a huge part of, our work is like one piece is like we need to advocate for these things to happen, obviously street improvement. So that's usually in this case, like you might have seen a lot of construction happening as a result of our city's bond programs. San Antonio issues a lot of improvements through our bond programs, and we've worked to have influence in those spheres. But in those bond programs, they talk about, maybe some pedestrian improvements, maybe some bike infrastructure improvements, but they don't usually nail down all the details during the development of that bond program. So that's when, the community engagement components happens later on and the design work and whatnot. And so, yes, yeah, we get involved in that, try to share, meeting information for folks to get involved where we have capacity to do that or encourage folks to ask for particular elements, maybe actual protected bike lane or improvements at intersections to, really help with that process of having a, you know, good bike lane and how do you get to the intersection once you meet that intersection. So yeah, it's that whole process we have to look at from, the concept of in the start, maybe the bond during the bond process, all the way to the end for those improvements later on. Then also like you talked about Hemisphere Park, like they're doing a great job in terms of like providing those, end of trip destination or accommodations, especially for like cyclists. There's bike racks, or maybe it could be some covered bike parking in there in the future, hopefully. Maybe
Hmm.
some more, like bike washing stations. But yeah, for us, it's like, working with other community groups, maybe like Strong Towns or others to help spread that word of like, these are the things we should be considering for future improvements.
Have you ever traveled to another city or even another country and been inspired to bring back some of the stuff that you saw there?
Always, Jacob. Always. I've been fortunate enough to go to places like Portland. A lot of people know that as a great cycling city. So even DC, I think they were doing a lot of really innovative, interesting stuff outside of, the core part of DC. Of course, got your great transit accommodations, but even bike infrastructure. One thing, I was fortunate to go to the NACTO conference last year, and that was in DC. I got to go ride on some really great urban trails, and that's the way they construct part of those. Of course, you have your off street trails, and then those might meet some on street bike lanes, for instance. And, I was really impressed with, again, how other cities are doing it and how we can bring that back to San Antonio and how those conversations like thinking about this differently. So yeah, I mean, trails to again, like I mentioned too, like the accommodations for cyclists. How are we're building this bike infrastructure? What are we doing once people get off their bike at the ends? Like, do we
Mhm.
have adequate bike parking and good enough bike parking at that? Having the proper bike racks to store a bike and not get it stolen.
Oh, yeah, I definitely see some really creative designs, like, "That looks really nice, but I probably would not wanna use that as a bike rack." I
Yeah.
saw close by where I live just a literal, like, dachshund-shaped one. I'm like, "Yes, that's great. Don't wanna use that." What kind of organizations are you working with? Are you collaborating with Strong Towns, any other nonprofits in the city?
Yeah, so mention Strong Towns already. I have to mention our friends of the Great Springs Project. Being from Austin, I'm sure you've heard about the Great Springs Project and the work
Yeah.
they're doing to connect San Antonio and Austin with amazing trail and conserve, protect vital lands and resources on the way. They're actually a key part in helping us get up and going as an organization in the beginning. And we're still working with them quite a bit on different projects that would connect to that overall trail network. But I mentioned, yeah, people like Strong Towns, even, San Antonio's Rail Trans. We did a lot of work together when San Antonio's developing a new transit oriented development policy framework. But I think the really cool part that we did during the Complete Streets policy development process was bringing in folks like the Nature Conservancy, public health focus groups, because as you know, transportation is like the lifeblood of how we get around. Yeah, not just going to work, but going to the doctor's office or going to see our friends and family, getting groceries, getting coffee with our friends, or just cruising around. And so I think that was incredibly important and seeing those folks get involved, getting up there in city, speaking at city council and talking about why green infrastructure is important. And, when we talk about reshaping our streets or redesigning our streets. So, again, having those community groups who are boots in the ground and just like, hey, we need more street lighting. Can we make sure that's a key part of this process? And so, yeah, I think it's fun to make sure, like, like we're not just like bike and pedestrian advocacy groups, but we make sure we bring in, holistic approach to make sure that we have that better urban environment and urban design for our streets too.
When talking to other, people like city council and other groups like that, have you ever run into any sort of opposition, and what have they told you before?
Well, we've been doing okay in that part.
Okay.
Just kind of like tweaking certain policies, I guess, or approaches lately. I mean, fortunately, we had for instance, when the bike network plan was adopted, our city council is composed of 10 city council members and one mayor, and that's bike network plan was adopted with a 10-1 vote. And so I think people are generally supportive of these policies and plans, and even that the person who voted against the bike network plan, I happen to live in that council member's district, and we had a meeting afterward to talk about, okay, this is legal city policy plan, like what can we do to move this forward? So I think fortunately right now there's been a good working relationship with most city council members. It's just kind of getting that approach to, how we can make these things happen.
Okay, that's great news. So, generally, the city council is on board with any sort of bike infrastructure because they obviously want San Antonio to be a great biking city, not only biking, but walking and scooting around. And is there any sort of public transportation included in these talks?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think you might have heard too, San Antonio recently, approved additional funding to fund via Metropolitan Transit's new BRT style service, Advanced
Yeah.
Rapid Transit, or their
Hmm.
green and silver lines running east to west and north and south. As well as like better bus service, making sure there's less wait times, decreasing that, 30-minute headways down to 15 minutes or whatever it may be, make sure we have those shorter wait times. And right now, actually, there's interesting conversation with city council talking about zero fare transit service.
Hmm.
And so I think it's gonna be interesting, working with council members to how can we find that right solution for our city, especially as San Antonio, if you compare it to other major metros, we're still underfunded, I believe, per capita compared to like, Dallas and Houston and Austin. So that means that affects, overall, expansion of bus service, less wait times, et cetera. But also, I know council members also want to see, better fare, more equitable, pricing and, reduce or free fares for residents across our region. So those are some critical conversations happening right now, and we'll see what happens. Yeah, there's a lot of different takes on that right now in city council. So
Hmm.
I think that's like an evolving conversation, especially as we do have a fairly new city council. As you might have seen, we have a fairly new mayor, and about, let's see, for how many council members are brand new, or new to city council, but there's some newer conversations we're having.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the equity aspect. What does that mean for equity across the city of San Antonio?
I guess in what terms of development?
Building this kind of development across the city, sometimes it's centralized to just like downtown or north or south or east or west. How can we make sure that everybody, all citizens of San Antonio are getting equal share of this type of development? Good bike
Sure.
lanes, good transit, all of that.
Yeah, I think that's where we also have to make sure that we're not just like piecemealing the equity approach into individual projects,
Okay.
as opposed to how we made sure that, the new complete streets policy, one key element that was missing for that was an equity approach. That's like, of course, a newer standard that we have to be using. And so the city has a lot of, uh, equity goals for our community, but also we have to make sure that is fully baked into policies like complete streets and bike network plan to make sure that we're not just like jumping in like, okay, how can we make sure we're accommodating for residents in this
Hmm.
particular zip code versus that one? I'd even make sure like how are we even like, again, how are we working with residents in particular communities that some people may not feel comfortable using the bike lane at all. Maybe they just want to use a shared use path, a really wide sidewalk that could be 10 to 12 feet wide. And so how are we, having those conversations about what is the best use for people and like having those conversations, what do people actually want in their communities to help them get around easier? Again, like you said, whether they're walking and biking, using the scooter and maybe try to get to their destination or get into transit to get further, to get to places further away and more. So again, I think, yeah, I'm glad we're baking in the equity approach into our most recently adopted policies and plans to start
Hmm.
with.
Changes like this, incorporating a ton of bike lanes into downtown, incorporating walkability and removing parking and stuff like that. That takes a lot of cultural and political shifts. How do you make that possible? How can people see that this is best for the city of San Antonio?
I think a big part of it is having that storytelling and creating opportunities for people to get together um, and share that we exist. Um, and I think I grew up in San Antonio. Fortunately, grew up here and able to move back and work in these spaces. And one thing that got me fired up and interested in working in advocacy is just like helping get people together. Like we have an amazing bike community, huge, lots of bike groups to get involved with. But sometimes we were a little disorganized at times in like getting together to go advocate on these topics and issues, or just even be able to like, can we have somebody to encourage different cyclists to show up to this meeting to say that we want bike lanes or to advocate for these policy changes. And so I think that just matters a lot, just showing up. I've seen that whether it's, showing up at the bike month proclamation we have at city council and in our county. So, speaking or not just attending city council meetings, but speaking during public comments as city council is deliberating on, like, for instance, like I said, a like network plan, or even trying to get folks to show up at meetings or writing comments online that showing that they support a new bike lane. So again, that's the equity approach and issue too is that not everybody is able to attend a meeting at 5 or 6 o'clock at night and sit through a presentation, have to like figure out what's going on, take care, childcare, taking care of transportation costs, and so like encouraging city officials like how can we make that process better because that is not very equitable in terms of how we're doing community engagement in those cases either.
Mm. I do hear that a lot. Like I ask, how can people participate in this discussion? And most times it's just show up to the city council meetings, show up, make your voice heard, bring your friends, and you make a good point about it's also the equity. Like some people can't show up at 5. They're working until 9, or they have children at home, or they're a single parent, stuff like that. And I'm glad you and the city council are trying to find a solution for that. Where can people find you online? How can people find ActivateSA?
Yeah, so visit activatesa.org. evolving websites. Yeah, we're a very kind of a still kind of grassroots style organization. We're adding on new web pages and other things to help folks find things, but I think one way for us or folks to get involved is through our community coalition, and that's our SATX Trails and Safe Streets Coalition. Right now, we're meeting monthly on the last Tuesday of the month at noon. And to take it back to our foundings, we started as a coalition. We didn't really call it that then. We were just kind of like a group of people just getting together, talking about how we can make these things happen, what we're talking about. Like I mentioned, we evolved into we were working our complete streets policy at the Complete Streets Coalition. We've always been working on trails and safe streets. So that's when we switched over to the SATX Trails and Safe Streets Coalition. And so ever evolving, check out that, but also encourage folks to check out, our events like the Fiesta Bike Parade or other seminars or other events we're hosting.
If you're enjoying the show, leave a rating or a like. It's a small gesture that goes a long way in helping other urbanists find the show. Now back to the show. Yeah, I was checking out your website a little bit and I saw a little bit of the quick build projects. Can you tell me more about those?
Yeah. So that Quit Bill project, kind of our first that we
Yeah.
were undertaking or still working on. I'll have to say, going back to the start, it's well, let me frame it this way. What's going to happen is a cool, some bulb outs at an intersection. It was supposed to be on some beautiful, creative crosswalks originally. We'll go into the policy a little bit later, but let's just go back to where that came from because I think everything has a foundation. And so we were working with some folks in the neighborhood just north of downtown called Beacon Hill. And those folks were said, hey, along this one particular corridor, it does not feel safe. So we took out our street audit a tool. And since we call it a street audit because we put this online, it's essentially like a walk bike audit on an online format. And we put together this tool and conducted a walk audit too. And I believe we got over like 100 inputs in that street audit tool. And I think 20 people showed up to that walk audit. And then that neighborhood also did some other work with our local metropolitan planning organization, MPO, the Alamo Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. So it's called a walkable community workshop. It's a much larger version of a street audit. They did it like neighborhood wide. And a resident in that neighborhood worked with us to write grants to AARP. They have their demonstration grants, which is actually open right now. And we got a grant to work on. At the time, we were proposing a creative crosswalk. Think of a colorful crosswalk like you might have seen across the nation or internationally. Well, let's just say the city's interpretation at the time of the MUTCD guidelines, is essentially guidelines that govern how and what you could put on the roadway from like markings to signs.
Yeah.
City said that was not allowed at the time. Later on, Governor Abbott issued a letter stating that, they're going to follow in accordance with the U.S. Department of Transportation's guidelines on not having essentially any in terms of distractions on the streets, such as murals or political ideologies, whatever it may be. And so that kind of squashed our desire to create a creative build-outs. Like we had an artist selected and everything. So now we're at the process working with the city and installing painted bulb outs. And so it's been a wild ride.
Yeah.
And we're hopefully getting close to implementation next month. So
Okay.
sorry for that whole long drawn out story there, but let's talk about the process too. It's been quite a journey. But our city is actually going to be working on their own quit build program. We do not have a fully existing quit build program within our city, aside from like some traffic calming measures. So we're excited about that. So hopefully have a better program and process in place so that the city can have a better process what they're doing. And maybe for when residents request something, we can have a better process to follow on to.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a
Great.
lot there.
No, 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 oh, no. I just saw your picture on your website. I was like, that looks really cool. And the artist is obviously very talented. I would love to have that kind of stuff in my neighborhood.
Right?
And
Safety enhancements and art on our streets.
I know. I like to ask this question to all of my guests towards the end of the recording. What are some books, either nonfiction, or I got a fiction one last week about urbanism, trails, city planning, anything of that sort that you would recommend people pick up and read?
So I know lots of people recommend, books from people like Jeff Speck or other great,
Mm-hmm.
urbanist authors. But I happen to be a graduate of UT San Antonio's Urban Regional Planning Program.
Okay.
And as coming from my former profession or my former job was I worked at the Alamo Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, our regional transportation planning organization. And there's one book that really resonated with me because a lot of people don't realize the roles that local MPOs, metropolitan planning organizations, have in their region. There's a book, I believe oh my gosh, I think Fragmented Metropolis, I believe. And it's just really interesting look at how other might be a different book, how other regional governance um, take place or how they function. So I might have to get back to you on what that
Okay.
proper book name is because I don't think I just Googled it. It's not coming up right. But I
Okay.
think more people, we help to understand how we can have better or better regional governance. Just from like, Texas, we do not have regional land use or do not have great regional land use planning, which creates more sprawl and other issues. And so I think that could help more people understand like what we're up against and maybe how we can improve that system if there are opportunities for that. And learning more again, like learning about how we can be better regions because most places in Texas, especially, are urban areas are rapidly growing and are more sprawling. So how can we create more walkable, bikeable
Yeah.
environments throughout the area?
Especially since San Antonio and Austin are just kind of like melding into one another. Yeah, it's very important how we're gonna build that region in the next 10, 20, or 50 years and how to connect people. My answer is trains.
I agree
I just
too.
talked to SART and they're like, trains is the answer.
That's one of the reasons I love going to DC all the time. I just like I fly into Dulles usually just so I can take in the Silver Line.
Yeah. I took my first Amtrak last Wednesday and it was great. Now I have to get my wife convinced to take Amtrak. There's a station in my hometown and I'm like, let's just go get some barbecue, come back for the day. It's gonna be great.
Do it, do it. So I mean, I've traveled, regionally on train in Europe, and it's one of the best things ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree. I mean, if I go back to that book,
Yeah.
it's called "Governing the Fragmented Metropolis: Planning for Regional Sustainability." Again, like, there's a lot of good books about our urbanism. So I think that's like an approach we need to discover more. How can we improve regional governance? Because, like in San Antonio, for instance, we have a metropolitan planning organization that's separate from our council of governments. Whereas places like Dallas and Houston, their council of governments, where they do more, farther out, regional planning and supports, those are on the same roof as our metropolitan planning organization. They usually have separate board of directors, but they're under the same roof. And I think that's, again, how can we be more collaborative in an urban environment, but across the region too? So, yeah, it's one of my like takes as a former MPO employee too. Is like, and as an advocate, like we need to work on that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. This is a really interesting conversation. I hope to hear more about you guys.
Yeah, let me know next time you're here, and I'd love to go for a bike ride or a scooter ride or hop on the bus and, go to different places,
Yeah,
or
for sure.
kayak too. Now that people don't know you can kayak on the San Antonio River. So
All the way up to like that Irish pub.
there's certain times of the year you can kayak in the downtown portion.
Oh, okay.
They've opened that up for more opportunities, but you can hop on kayak and go all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico.
Cool. Awesome.
Where my background is at, you can hop on the river there.
Okay, will do. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jacob.
All right, bye.
Take care.
Over the coming weeks, we will continue to explore the people and projects that are putting our cities in motion. You can follow Cities in Motion on Instagram for behind the scenes content and updates for the show. I'm Jacob, and thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Don't forget to keep your cities in motion.